Welcome to PAB 2010.
So some of you have asked me already, what is it? Because it just says, the title said it, or something like that. So my goal is to kind of explain to you what it is. And what it is, without me sort of going on about it first, is it is that thing that you know has it when you're listening to it, but you can't describe it. So at CBC, they call these, or public radio calls this driveway moments, where you're listening to a really good story, and there's like 4 minutes or 3 minutes left, and you've just arrived home, and you have to stay in your driveway in your car because you have to listen to how it plays out. So it is just that, it's that thing, that kind of unknown quantity, that thing that is right on the tip of your tongue, but you can't really articulate. It's like it's got it. You listen to someone's podcast, and you know that they've got it, but you don't know what it is, and more importantly, you don't know how to replicate it. So I'm going to show you how to replicate it, basically steal it, essentially, with good intentions. But first, I want to talk a bit about sort of the scope of how technology has changed the way that we do audio art, or whether it's podcasting or making audio art or making radio. And performance media, when it first started in audio, was in theaters, right? People were sitting far away. They were sitting 20 meters, 50, 100 meters, or something like that. So as a performer, your job was to belt out the lyrics. Absolutely. And a lot of the greats from that era, Ella Fitzgerald and things like that, they were like half singing, half yelling. And that's because they had to. That's the nature of the technology, the technology being the theater back in those days. So a great example of that style is Ethel Merman.
There's no business like show business, like no business I know. Everything about it is appealing.
I'll spare you the rest of it. And then radio came on the scene, and that changed the sound of audio in two ways. For one thing, instead of it being in a room full of people, suddenly you were listening in smaller clusters. You were listening in family groups of, like larger families. They had larger families back then, so groups of 6 or 8 or something like that. And so listening to radio was like a family affair. But more interestingly, the kind of audio had to change as well. Because before, when all the technology was essentially the theater and the acoustics in the theater, you had to belt it out, and you couldn't really do that on radio because the singers who were doing that, like Ethel Merman, were literally blowing transistors out of transmitters. They were literally damaging transmitters by, the technicians didn't have the levels right or whatever, they weren't expecting it. So the performers that weren't really used to singing in any other kind of way actually saw their careers begin to cripple when radio came on the scene. It was, if you actually sort of look at the history of it, it's really kind of interesting. Those big, huge belters really had problems. And then came this woman. This is a singer from Newark, New Jersey, who gained a small bit of fame in the 20s. Her name is Vaughn DeLeaf, and she invented a softer side of singing, which has now become known as crooning. This is a really rare recording of one of her first songs.
Tonight I'm downhearted, although we have parted. I love you and I always will.
Anyone recognize the song? So you can hear a vast difference in style, right, between the theater performance and between the other performance. One of the things that most people don't realize is Elvis didn't actually sing Are You Lonesome Tonight? It was hers first.
Are you lonesome tonight? Do you miss me tonight?
So the sound of the art, the sound of audio, had to change to meet the technology of the day. And this gave way to Bing Crosby's all over the world, and still today crooning is a very popular, who's the guy from Victoria? Thank you, Michael Bublé, right? I mean, very popular style. And it was much more intimate sound, and so it was the change of the change of the technology helped change the sort of the art. And then came TV, and along with TV came shifting demographics. And so families were smaller, they were living independently, and so where you might have had 8 people listening to a radio, now we're gathered in even smaller groups, and so we're gathered in 2 or 3 at a time. And the other thing about television and how that changed audio and performance is that we were sitting closer. Again, we kept getting physically closer to it. So you started out in theater where you're 100 meters away. away, and then you're listening to sort of in the early 20s and 30s radio where you're still sort of in a room. Well, now as you can see, families are sitting actually closer to the actual object, and I'll explain why that's important in just a moment. But TV really brought kind of a sense of intimacy. You could see people, obviously, and a lot of the really great filmmakers like Errol Morris, are really good at capturing that kind of intimacy. They're really good with that kind of an idea. And then video did not kill the radio star. Of course, radio changed, and the sound and the art and the style of production changed with it as well. Most radio listening today is done in the car. Any survey that you see, the number one, where do you listen to the radio? It's in the car. The second thing is while you're doing other things. So while you're doing chores, when you're doing dishes, when you're vacuuming, things like that. So that was a significant shift in the way that people consumed media as well. That was the first time at which the audio or the performance switched from being foreground listening to background listening. So it used to be that you were actively listening to the audio, to the radio or whatever. Now it was just kind of there, and it was filler, essentially, for your head, or it was just kind of music was on. And you see these a lot with sort of, the soft rock stations that want you to be part of, like, the midday morning crew, and you work at the office and you have the radio tuned on. So that was the first time that it was in the background. And the other thing that happened is, once again, the audience's size got smaller, and now we're down to people of one. And the most successful radio hosts, like the Peter Zoskis of the world, really understood that intimacy, that sound of intimacy, was what really drove a really good connection. And for those of you who listened to Peter Zosky, can I just see a show of hands of how many of you listened to Peter Zosky? So most of you, yeah. So he had just a really great. It felt like he. It felt like he was like you were just kind of eavesdropping a conversation at his dinner table, right? That was a real good sense of intimacy. And it was because he understood that audiences are one, that people, when they're listening to the radio or audio, they're in audiences of one. So this, I believe, is where podcasts are actually stalled. The blue line in my horrible graphics represent the size of the audience listening. So that size shrinks from being consumed from 500 people at a time to being consumed to one person at a time. And in fact, I would argue that podcasts are even more intimate than one person listening to the radio, because one person listening to an actual radio station, you're listening in your car through speakers. A lot of podcast listening is done with earphones or earbuds, which are really close to the eardrum. Now, there's a reason that I keep harping on this. Size of audience changes the way, or size of audience and technology changes the way the performance is done, and that's because I don't actually believe that many podcasters, of course none of you in this room, have taken advantage of the fact that there is that intimacy, that when you're speaking to someone in your podcast, you are most likely speaking to someone this far away from their ear, literally this far away from their ear. And yet what I hear a lot of podcasters do, unfortunately, if this is going to work, is they replicate radio, and they try to make themselves sound like the radio stations that they hear. Well, the radio stations they hear are largely AOR or CHR, which are radio formats, meaning like hits and album-oriented rock, where the DJs talk like this all the time. Hey, it's 18 degrees, sunshine today. Traffic's let's check out traffic today, and they perform it. They really kind of belt it out. And I don't think that that's where podcasting should go, because I think that we are so close to eardrums. We're so close that that's a really intimate place to be. And I'm going to play you some examples of radio people who really understood that and have a really good sense of making that feel really intimate. And the one easy secret is to just get really close to the mic once in a while. Like if you're going to say something, the old trick is to, if you're going to say, I have a secret to tell you, you probably aren't going to say this, but when someone says this, if you watch their body language, they'll lean forward a little bit, they'll kind of do this, one of these, and then their voice will go like this just a little bit, right? You should be doing that more, because it brings it close, and you're not listening. Anytime I hear someone on a podcast, or even on a radio for that matter, say, hey, everybody, it makes me cringe, because there's no everybody in the room. Most likely, 95% of the time, the people who you are talking to are one person. So you keep that in mind before I get into sort of these 7 steps of how to replicate it. It's really important that I talk about lives right there. It lives at the end of the space and technology continuum, where the technology has gotten to a place where we're very intimate, we're close, and we're all listening sort of on individual ones. And so, I think that's something that I would like to hear more of.
Thank you very much, Todd.
All right, thank you.